Hey everyone, it's Eric from foundersbeta.com, and I'm so excited to have Lindy from EssayJack. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Eric. It's really great to be here.
So before we dive in, I'm gonna give a shout out to our sponsor, our friends at Headway.io. If you wanna validate your startup, build a company, check them out. So let's dive into the questions with Lindy here. So tell us a little bit about yourself and the startup as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Lindy Ledohowski. I used to be a high school English teacher, and then you can probably see the degrees on the wall. I went and did a whole bunch of other degrees and became an English professor at the University of Waterloo. And then it was from that experience of teaching students and seeing them kind of struggle with the expectations of scholarly writing that the startup EssayJack was born. I sort of figured, oh, okay, well, there are probably more scalable ways to teach this foundational skill of academic writing than just standing at the front of the classroom for the next 40 years.
Right. So tell me about the early days. Like when you just had the idea, you're like, okay, this is something I can build. Like what was the next step after you had the idea?
Yeah, so I mean, as I say, I was an English teacher. I was an English professor. I was definitely not a coder. I was not sort of even all that technically inclined. I'm not by nature the sort of person who's like an early adopter of technology. I like books.
Right.
But what we ended up doing was we had this vision for pedagogically sound software that would help students with writing. And so we literally like cut out pieces of paper and moved it around as a way to kind of like actually prototype it on the desk. Like, and then you'd click this and it would do this. And, so then we found a developer, just a freelancer, and had a meeting with him over dinner and did that whole like, if we click here and go, can you build that?
Oh, okay.
And he did.
Right.
And so he went away for 3 weeks and kind of built the really early kind of, we call it the alpha, EssayJack Alpha, but it was that really early minimum viable product for us to then kind of take to the next steps.
Right. So speaking of minimum viable product, like what was like the first version of EssayJack like? Like, did you have like lots of feature, or did you cut down features? Any tips you may have for our audience?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is super crucial, and this goes for all kind of startup founders and people building things, the minimum viable product in my mind should really be the minimum viable valuable product, the MVP.
Right.
Because ultimately what you're trying to do is not only find out what's viable, so what works, you're also trying to find out what's valuable. So what will people pay for if you're monetizing your startup, or what do people find valuable? And so out of all of the features, so now EssayJack in its fully mature, 6 years later from that early day, it has a whole bunch of features, but that early MVP was really just an essay editing interface. So, and it wasn't all that expansive. It was just a 5-paragraph essay. So on the first screen, you sort of started typing in and there were sentence starters. And then the next screen gave you essentially the breakdown and the structure for just a 5-paragraph essay. Because really that was the thing that we thought was valuable, this like essay editing scaffolding platform. And if nobody wanted that, we wouldn't have bothered to expand it to become institutionally capable, to work with learning management systems. We wouldn't have moved beyond the 5-paragraph essay. Like all of the other kind of features that we built over time was built on the back of that MVP that was just does anybody even want an essay structuring tool?
Right. So obviously, I mean, you had a great network, obviously teaching. And what was it like getting those early setup users? Like, how did you even convince them? Be like, yeah, this is something we built, and you should at least try.
Yeah, and basically that was that. You took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, that was kind of it. And so for us, our first, so when we have that MVP or the alpha EssayJack, my co-founder and I were both professors, and we looked at it and we played around and we were like, oh, it works. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then we immediately knew, yeah, but obviously it works for us. It came out of our brains. Does it actually work for the intended the intended user. So that's that second V in the MVVP. Like, we need to get this in front of students. So then we did go to the local school, and first we had to show it to the administrators, so that the principal, the vice principal, then we went to the Department of English and showed it to them. Once we got their buy-in, they were like, yeah, actually, this makes sense. We then went to grade 8, grade 11, and grade 12 classes and ran some tests. And then when that was really successful, we then went to the University of Toronto and we're like, hey, do you want to test this? And again, the associate dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the biggest faculty in that university, was like, yeah, let's do a pilot. So then we got it in 5 undergraduate classes. So all told, that really early like alpha, and it was ugly. It didn't have any design. It wasn't, it was really just, does anybody want this? It really was a proof of concept. We had probably about 205, 210 students, from grade 8 all the way up to university in the various different kind of testing scenarios, so that we could then get some data back.
Right. Because that's always a challenge, getting those early set of users, right? So
yeah, and I think so. You absolutely 100% have to lean into your networks, and even networks you don't know you have. Like, talk to everybody talk to talk to your Twitter friends. Like, build up your community. As I say, I was lucky because I had been working in the field, so there was like high trust when I went into these educational institutions. So as an educator, I built an education product. I think had I made something in fashion or other kind of consumer goods, it would have been harder because I don't speak that language naturally, whereas professionally, it was a little bit easier for me to just kind of walk into a school and be like, okay, can you try this?
Yeah, because, I love this, because I think one of the things is you saw a problem, you experienced it yourself, teaching for so many years, right? And you went out and built it, right? I think that's really the best for startups, right? And
it is, and I think it does answer that question. Like, if you can say, like, I built this, and here's the use case, like, here are the people I built it for, that's really helpful. So in my case, as you say, I was solving a problem that, like, I saw in my classes. But even if you're solving another, like, a gap in the market that you've researched and maybe you haven't experienced, but you can say, like, this is the user who's going to be helped by this thing that I'm building, then I think that goes a long way.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So shifting to talking about sales, of course, you have to monetize at some point, right? Like, for every startup, right? Otherwise, I call it a hobby, right? Like, have to be able to generate at least some form of sales. So what was it like, with EssayJack? Like, you had the user build up. How did you go about, like, even putting a pricing page and be like, hey, we want to generate sales here, right? Because of course it's you're solving a big problem and it delivers value, right? What was it like?
Yeah, and so we probably made every mistake in the books that you can make on the selling front at the beginning, largely because, again, we were so focused on the product, like, we're building this amazing product. So after we had that initial MVVP, we went and we had lots of feedback, and we kind of scoped out how to build at least a beta product that we wanted to bring to a broader market. And then as soon as we did the same thing, we went to schools and we're like, hey, can we show you this? And then immediately they started saying, yes, we want it. How much? And so then we started, oh my God, like, we hadn't even begun to think about what this looks like from a monetization perspective. And so then for us, we thought about it philosophically. Is this an app or is this a digital resource? And if it's a digital resource, it should be priced more like a textbook. And so that's kind of the route that we went down. And then we started selling it like a digital resource in a textbook kind of fashion, or a digital textbook. And so we partnered in Canada with Nelson Education very early on. Like, it was we still had a beta product. It was maybe a year after that early beta launch that we partnered with Nelson to be our distributor in Canada. And so they were selling it like a digital textbook. And we learned a lot about Edtech sales process along the way. So I would say we were lucky that we ended up learning a lot along the way, but I would be lying if I said we were super smart and strategic at the beginning. But then, as you say, if you're building something that's not a hobby, you do have to have a monetization strategy, even if that monetization strategy is going to say come later, or it's going to kick in, you know, at some later point. You have to know when and how those triggers are going to be set. And so with EssayJack, we do sell institutionally, so that's that B2B Edtech sales. But then you can also get a monthly subscription. So if you're just a student who's like, I don't know what I don't know, then you can sign up for a month and you can cancel after a month, or you can keep going for as long as you like.
Yeah. So talk about selling to institutions. Like, what was that like? Because I mean, you know, it's hard for a startup, you know, to approach a big university and be like, hey, we're building this great tool. What was it like for you?
Yeah, so B2B sales in EdTech is really interesting because it has a really long sales cycle, pretty much. Like, so other B2B SaaS sales can be a little bit more streamlined in the sense that decision making can be a little bit more clear cut. So for instance, if I had built like an HR tool and I went to big companies, I would go to their head of HR and I'd be like, here's this amazing thing that's going to make your life better in HR. In EdTech, if you're building something which, as EssayJack does, which really aids in learning outcomes, it's hard to attach a dollar amount to specific learning outcomes. It's very mandate driven. So universities are supposed to ensure that they are helping students meet these kind of learning outcomes, but how they go about doing that is sometimes divorced from payment. So teachers and professors and department heads and students love it, but in an institution, they don't pay for it. So then you have to kind of go up the chain. You have to have the buy-in from the users, but then you have to go through this kind of budgetary conversation. And so that's quite long. And so I would say if I were building EdTech again, I would build up that B2C consumer base first, because those individual users who feel the pain point, it's much quicker. They'll, in the moment that they're like, crap, I have an essay to write, they are inclined to get help. Whereas in an institutional setting, there's just a lot more kind of red tape and champions you have to get in. So in terms of advice I would give would be really know what the sales cycles are in your industry, because they are slightly different. And I was a bit naive about how long EdTech sales cycles can take.
Right, for sure. So yeah, you had a, you know, you continued with EssayJack, and, you know, we got the news, I guess, some months ago that you got acquired. So massive congrats.
Thank you. Thank you.
That really made our day. So, so proud of you and everything you accomplished with EssayJack. But tell me about that. Like, how was it? Like, how did that even come about? Were you just like going about?
I got my new swag. So we were acquired. We were acquired by Wise. So I'm now wiser than ever before. So what's exciting is actually, so we were doing our first external investment raise. So I was all just in like investment, you know, institutional investment, and getting all of our ducks in a row to raise VC funding for EssayJack. And then through that process in early 2021, it's actually a couple of different companies were like, well, maybe we should just acquire you and sort of bring you into our suite of offerings. And I hadn't been thinking about that. So then there was another Canadian EdTech CEO who I had met along the way through LinkedIn, again, in terms of building up your community and all that. So he was in my community. And so I was chatting with him and I was like, oh, you know, there are a couple of companies that are talking about acquisition. And I had, you know, do you have any input? Like, I haven't thought about that. And he said, well, if you're open to an acquisition conversation, like, don't say yes to anybody else. Let's actually have that conversation, which I hadn't been thinking about at all. So then there were like probably 3 or 4 that were sort of, I don't know, kicking the tires and sort of talking broadly about, you know, maybe EssayJack would fit within their suite of offerings, and I would find a happy home there. And then it was this other one, Wise, and Cyrus Moradian is the CEO of Wise. And then Cyrus came to the table with like a reasonable letter of intent kind of first, and started to move it to a more formal process. The thing, because I was still also thinking, well, maybe we'll do an investment raise, I said, okay, so I'll entertain this possibility if we can time box it to like 30 days. I'm not going to seek other investment or other, you know, acquisition offers if we can get through kind of due diligence and have a meeting of the minds within 30 days, because otherwise if it drags on, like, I can't just not continue on with investment and be in some acquisition conversation for 6 months that goes nowhere. And Cyrus and his team were really fantastic. And so we, I can't tell you, otherwise I'd have to kill you, what the total value of the deal was, but it was, I mean, I'm happy I joined Wise's leadership team. It's a really good, because what Wise offers, it also, as I say, it's in Edtech, and it has student-facing software as well, but principally in STEM. So the science, the technology, the engineering, the math. There are also some business and accounting courses, and they had nothing in English and nothing in the sort of writing space. And so they, on their own strategic plan, were wanting to expand that. So it was kind of a really, really good fit.
Right. Wow. That's great. So so any tips for anyone that wants to get acquired in like
I think so I'm now a big fan of the acquisition story as a way forward. And I think, like with startups, you kind of have 3 exits. I mean, one is you do the VC capital raise game, and ultimately the exit for that is really an IPO or sort of massive growth on that front so that your investors get their return. The second is a fairly kind of early-ish stage acquisition where really it's a strategic play. So you as the founders will probably have the highest upside, more so than, if you continue on getting diluted. And there are some really good aspects of being able to sort of choose that next step. And then the third is, of course, if you're successful in just making a profitable, money machine, you can just kind of have a lifestyle business forever. Now, the acquisition thing, I would say, so what's good about acquisition, if you can get it right, is if what your business does fills a strategic need of the acquiring company, then it's a good fit. If you don't have that kind of strategic alignment, then it's going to be hard to, then you already need such amazing cash flow and profitability to be acquired, because then you're only being acquired purely based on what you add to the bottom line. Whereas in EssayJack's case, yes, we had obviously revenue that we've now added to the bottom line of Wise, but we've also filled a strategic gap for them. And so that made the value of our company higher than if it was just like, hey, we're just straight up looking at how profitable you are and what your margins are like, because we were still an early stage startup. So it's not like we had achieved like massive, we're going to bring you like a whole bajillion dollars. That wasn't our case. And is, to be honest, often isn't the case of startups. Often you are trying to sort of juggle growth and scale and product market fit and revenues and a bunch of things. And then just as you start to figure all of that out, that's when you're like, okay, now we need to raise money. And in our case, we were like, okay, we have all of that figured out and all of the sort of messy lessons have been learned. And now we can find a happy home in another company as well.
That's amazing. So so what's the next exciting thing? I guess will EssayJack operate as like a separate brand, or what will it look like?
So for this fall, basically, starting right now, anybody who signs up for an EssayJack subscription will also get a Wise subscription, and anybody who signs up for a Wise subscription will also get an EssayJack subscription. So they're being run in parallel, but you get both. And then what we're researching and plotting out this term, so September to December, is how we integrate the two technologies. So is there this huge overlap? So do Wise users really want writing functionality built in? Do EssayJack users really want that STEM functionality built in? And so we now have the luxury of doing a little bit more like user research than you often have the luxury of when you're first building something, because when we first built EssayJack, we just had to get it built so we could have people using it. Whereas now we can go, well, we have a thing that works and that people like. So now we can figure out how it integrates in a really sort of intelligent way, in a way that's going to add value to kind of both users and ultimately lead us all to massive growth and world domination and all of those wonderful things in the EdTech land.
Amazing. So for our audience that want to connect with you, where can they go?
So they can definitely find me on LinkedIn. So Lindy Ledohowski on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Lindy. EssayJack is essayjack.com. And Wise is wiseprep.com. So you can find, wiseprep.com. So you can find me on all of those places.
Awesome. Well, Lindy, thank you so much for taking the time today to chat with us, to share your story. This is really incredible to see. And yeah, we're looking forward to your growth and with everything that you're doing. So thanks again.
Thanks so much, Eric. I will say one quick thing too. Like, what's exciting too about this story is Wise is Vancouver based and EssayJack is Toronto based. So this is still like a Canadian EdTech, a Canadian startup story, which is kind of nice because you know, often our Canadian ecosystem then gets poached by bigger and better. So it's kind of nice to keep it all at home in Canada.
For sure. Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Thanks so much, Eric.
All right, cheers.